Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Miriam Wallace. I'm Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences here at the University of Illinois Springfield, and I'm former chair of the Humanities Division at New College of Florida. Welcome to the fourth of 5 episodes in this series, 5 Disruptive Principles in the Liberal Arts. This one focuses on depth and breadth. The series is produced by Alt Liberal Arts. These programs would not be possible without support from the Open Society Foundation. Alt Liberal Arts is a global education initiative concerned with academic freedom and civic engagement in the liberal arts. In collaboration with Bard College and the Open Society University Network, Alt Liberal Arts offers free global online lectures and courses, for which you can register at altliberalarts.org. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. It will be here throughout the seminar, where you can enter questions or comments throughout. We look forward to discussing as many of your questions as time allows with our panelists, Dr. Jeff Lundy and Sam Kocher, who you'll meet a little bit further on. During this time of challenge, great challenge, I might add, for higher education, the 5 disruptive principles in the liberal arts featured in this series are perhaps more important than ever, because they are essentially disruptive to authoritarian ways of thinking, and they protect the true meaning of academic freedom. Dr. Nicholas Tampio of Fordham University, who will be offering 3 programs on academic freedom here at Alt Liberal Arts in June, offers some insight into today's topic of the disruptive principle of depth and breadth. In his book, Common Core, he maintains that national standards in reading, writing, and mathematics were meant to promote quality, but have too often instead reduced the power of communities and teachers to create lesson plans that incorporate the interests of their students, to offer experiential learning outside the classroom, to include experts as guest speakers, or to integrate special elements, including local culture and history. He further cites research that suggests that a lack of autonomy in the classroom lessens the feeling of fulfillment and empowerment of those who teach, which we know is critical in a time of teacher shortages. And we might add, it limits student engagement and ownership of students by students of their own education. Founded in 1960, New College in Sarasota, Florida, was a bold innovator in the liberal arts. By 2020, this resulted in its ranking as one of the top 5 public liberal arts colleges in the United States. In 2023, New College became a global news when a majority of trustees were replaced to fulfill a new mission to define the college in the ways that conform to a more tolerant and a more closed society. Less tolerant. This educational project began with the commission of a series of essays from 5 scholars, Drs. Robert Benedetti, Dan Chambliss, Stephen Miles, Juliana Pare-Blagov, and Eric Schickler, each highlighting disruptive principles as they were practiced at the historic New College of Florida between the years 1970 and 2020. Alt Liberal Arts is an independent educational organization, and it is not affiliated with New College of Florida. The views represented tonight do not represent authorities at the official New College of Florida. So now I want to welcome each of you to a special experience practiced at the historic New College. Each semester or term, when it came time for students to choose their classes, we did not do pre-registration, professors would present short mini classes, about 15 minutes. They could be mini lectures, they could be an interactive opportunity, they could be an informative session. And this was to engage students to think about taking their class, to explore their subjects, to get a sense of what it might be like to be a student with us. Up next, you will experience a mini class presented by Dr. Stephen Miles on the disruptive principle of depth and breadth, which was taped before a live audience at the Manatee Performing Arts Center. This mini class lecture is based on the essay written by Dr. Robert Benedetti with videography by Daniel Pothast. Afterwards, we will engage our panel in dialogue and will entertain your questions, which again, you can enter by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And now, Alt Liberal Arts presents Depth and Breadth with Dr. Stephen Miles.
What do we really mean when we talk about a liberal arts education? Is it just a checklist of general knowledge, a broad curriculum taught in the same way to every student? Or is it something much richer, with the freedom to explore the breadth of human knowledge while also diving deeply into what moves and challenges each individual most. Liberal education has been defined in many ways, but Cicero's idea of it as preparation for citizenship has endured. It's also often seen as a well-rounded education that balances broad exploration with specialization in practical skills. Over time, though, the temptation of educators to assign a number of mandatory diverse courses resulted in limiting both student ownership and engagement. At historic New College of Florida, the idea of a liberal education wasn't a list of requirements. It was a decades-long experiment in how students and faculty could work together to create lives driven by curiosity and engagement, providing a liberal arts education without sacrificing a student's choice or ability to take early steps towards mastery. Today, these ideas are particularly relevant. At a time when education seems obsessed with test scores, increasingly narrow curricula, and one-size-fits-all metrics for success, we yearn for a system that values curiosity and courage. What New College achieved was extraordinary, a way to embrace both depth and breadth in education, empowering students to explore widely while striving for mastery in what they loved most. Does that sound impossible? It isn't. The core of this vision is balance. Breadth and depth are often treated as rivals in the academy. Breadth is seen as a way to make you universally well-rounded. Depth provides specialized expertise. But when we treat them separately, breadth too often becomes superficial, and depth becomes rigid. What New College proved was that these two ideas could coexist as part of a cohesive experience. For over 50 years, New College reimagined general education and the liberal arts education. It didn't prescribe a narrow, pre-planned curriculum. Instead, it empowered students to design their own education collaboratively and thoughtfully, ensuring both breadth and depth in their passions and meaningful exploration across disciplines. This balance wasn't only theoretical. It was baked into the structures, the culture, and the relationships that defined New College. As Pat Kocher, past president of New College, has written, the uniqueness of the balance between depth and breadth at New College is that it is managed, quote, managed structurally rather than in required courses, and that New College does not assume that the same gen ed is appropriate for all students. To understand what makes this approach revolutionary, let's examine how the majority of higher education institutions have historically approached breadth and depth. Traditionally, students must complete a standard slate of general education requirements, usually introductory courses meant to expose them to a broad base of knowledge. In theory, this ensures that everyone emerges as a well-rounded individual. But in reality, this model often treats students as consumers, checking boxes on a list rather than pursuing breadth through curiosity or choice. And it treats every student the same. Any maintenance of the scale necessary for individualized attention is overlooked for the sake of the bottom line. There needs to be a sufficient number of faculty to engage students one-on-one and in small groups. Likewise, to benefit from individualized attention and to share perspectives with fellow students, the student body must also be sufficiently diverse in talents and backgrounds, yet share a universal ability to communicate directly with fellow students and faculty. Equally frustrating is that these list-based requirements can conflict with the students' journeys towards depth. When students feel forced to take unrelated courses just for the sake of well-roundedness, it can detract from their ability to focus fully on what matters most to them. Breadth in this model becomes the enemy of depth. Honestly ask yourself, is the same general education really appropriate for all students? Colleges might preach diversity, yet they often impose uniformity in how students learn. New College saw these flaws and set out to address them. Consider how New College encouraged depth and breadth through independent study projects, tutorials, and off-campus experiences. For 4 weeks each year, students designed projects tackling self-directed topics. Some conducted experiments or fieldwork. Others pursued artistic endeavors. A New College students once ran a successful campaign to become the youngest member of the New Hampshire legislature as part of an independent study. This commitment to balancing breadth and depth extended to the dormitories. New College did not group students by interest or major, so that the diversity of those living together helped to promote learning across disciplines. That was done with the belief that it is crucial to enlist students in helping other students understand different modes of thinking. Breadth wasn't restricted to campus either. Students could study abroad, intern with organizations, or engage in experiential learning. They measured water quality in Sarasota Bay, documented Underground Railroad archaeological sites, and analyzed data for nonprofits. With opportunities like these, breadth wasn't a limitation. It was liberating. At the same time, depth was nurtured through the faculty-driven indemnification of resources and through the senior thesis, which was a capstone experience reflecting a student's deep engagement with a specific research question or creative project. Rather than encouraging students to meet minimum requirements, they were encouraged to produce work that rivaled graduate-level theses in rigor and sophistication. One student described their New College experience as, quote, learning how to construct my education and ultimately how to construct a meaningful life. That's the power of teaching depth and breadth, side by side and personalized. What did this look like in action? Early in his single year of teaching at New College, Dan Chambliss recalled meeting a student on her first day of class. Afterward, he was sitting by the pool reading when she approached him and asked, "Do you mind if I ask you something?" Expecting a question about the syllabus or the requirements, he told her to go ahead. Instead, she asked, "What do you think of this whole existence of God thing?" Rather than engage in small talk, this first-year student dove into a profound question because she felt empowered to do so. The story speaks volumes about the culture of New College that it fostered. Students didn't just absorb lectures or regurgitate facts. They engaged deeply with ideas, tackling big, bold questions that demanded intellectual courage. Learning wasn't a performance, it was a conversation. New College showed us that education thrives when students have ownership and guidance, freedom and structure, breadth and depth. This is more than just an academic philosophy. It's a call to preserve curiosity, build intellectual resilience, and prepare thoughtful citizens. Through its contract system, its culture of active dialogue, and its rejection of rigid general education requirements, New College gave students the tools to shape their own intellectual journeys. They learned how to think critically, how to fail constructively, and how to connect ideas across disciplines. Imagine what it would mean for other institutions to take these lessons to heart, not just for the sake of traditional academics, but to cultivate lifelong learners and engaged citizens. The foundational idea behind a genuinely classical liberal arts education is that it frees the mind from cliches and unexamined conclusions in a world beset with disinformation and conspiracy theories. It inoculates the mind against misleading arguments. The New College experiment was bold. It challenges us to ask whether rigid academic structures are stifling the very creativity and engagement that education was meant to foster. It's arguable that the New College way is particularly effective for the preparation of democratic citizens. The New College general education depends on empathy with students and faculty encouraged to listen to and learn from others. This is a critical skill for the democratic citizen who, as Aristotle argues, must lead and follow with equal energy and candor. We don't have to choose between breadth and depth. We just need to approach them by balancing exploration with mastery, passion with inquiry, and curiosity with collaboration. Whether we're students, faculty, or administrators, we need to push for a culture that prizes both intellectual depth and broad horizons. When students take ownership of their education, they don't just find answers. They learn to ask the questions that really matter, framing them in all of their complexity, and come to see possible solutions as well. Thank you.
enter your questions by clicking on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And today we'll have Dr. Jeff Lundy, who directs global coordination of ESG reporting for PepsiCo's Public Policy and Government Affairs team, analyzing issues with legislative and policy implications. Jeff earned his PhD in economic sociology from the University of California, San Diego, and he holds a BA in sociology from New College of Florida, which is interesting because I remember Jeff being connected with the music department. So I'm curious to talk about that. Thank you for joining us. And welcome also to panelist Sam Kocher, who holds a Master of Public Health degree with a concentration in behavioral, social, and community health from Indiana University and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Gender Studies from New College of Florida, and who was a senior thesis student with me back in the day. They are currently the education and data manager at a harm reduction behavioral health program with sites in both rural and urban settings. So if you get a chance to look at the essay or watch the video, there are a number of good points in there. But I take away a couple of things. There was one quote that really stuck with me, which is learning wasn't a performance, it was a conversation. So this notion of exchange as foundational to making knowledge. And then he talks quite a bit about the tension between breadth and depth and the tendency, which I'm sure we'll talk about, to treat breadth more as a series of checkbox things to jump through, but really posing it instead as about curiosity, about teamwork, about stepping outside your comfort zone. And depth, which we often think of as the opposite of breadth, which is often presented as focus in a single subject, often converted at colleges and universities into a major, but instead here trying to think about seeking expertise, chasing a topic deeper. And I was thinking about some of the mechanisms that we used to get there. I would say things like the individual tutorial where we might take something from a classroom into greater depth, the January term projects where you could choose a topic, find someone to sponsor it, work on it, and then the senior thesis project. So let me start by asking about breadth. So this kind of call for breadth, or what's sometimes called well-roundedness, but is also really meant to produce citizenship fundamentally, right? This is the reason why we think people should probably not only study one very narrow area, but it's degenerated many times now into a kind of checkbox of what we call general education requirements. And arguably this gets set up in high school where you have very limited options to choose an elective. You might get to choose to take French or Spanish. You might get to choose to take music if you have room in your schedule. It's often thought of by students now, and I'll hear them say this is just a series of hoops. I just have to jump through these hoops to get to the real thing, which is going to be the major. And over my time at New College, we moved to some general expectations that students would do work across the humanities, the arts, the social sciences, and the natural sciences. There was no single required general education course everybody had to take, not even a basic composition course or a basic mathematics course. So I wonder if you could touch a little bit on that transition from high school to college. What did that feel like? Was it liberating or terrifying? And at New College, how did you experience breadth? Did it feel like these were required things you just had to do, or did it set you up to try things that you didn't even know you were interested in? So I'm opening the floor. Wants to jump in?
I'm happy to go first, I guess, if that's okay. Miriam, your memory is very sharp. I, in fact, double majored in music composition and sociology. Perhaps why Steve thought I'd be a good breadth person here, especially now that I end up working in a field not too strongly related to either. So it's a good argument, perhaps, for breadth. When I was looking at this question, I remembered something that I had forgotten from a long time ago. I'm pretty certain it was in my senior year in high school. I believe I'd already gotten into New College, so I knew I was already, into the college that I really wanted to go to. And like all the quote unquote gifted students, I was always automatically enrolled in almost like what's a track, right? Like to your point, like you're going to be in the AP of this, you're going to be the AP of that. And like the schedules don't even permit you to really do anything separately. And I remember that I don't know, I think I just did not really like the final math teacher I had at the time. And I unilaterally, without consulting with anyone, just I don't know even how I did this, removed myself from that class and then went to the like remedial class that was at the same time. Because it was a very two-track system at least at our high school. There was either like, really advanced or like, uh, or really a bit far back from where I had been. And, I said at the time, I was like, if I need to know this subject, I'll learn it later when I need it, and I think the funny thing is that now, since then, even since new college, I actually have a very math focused analytics job. I have learned linear algebra and calculus and multivariate calculus. So like, there was no hindrance to me. Like I did, that instinct was right. I learned it when I needed to and when I wanted to. So the experience at New College, I came in if I extremely ready to study, take a philosophy class, Latin, music composition, sociology. And yeah, it was utterly liberating. I truly grew as a person. Steve Miles, it's so unfortunate we didn't get to hear him speak. He was my advisor and was a huge part of that for me and really helping to develop my career as a student and moving on eventually to grad school. So
No, that's great. The connection with you learn it because you know that you need it and what you need it for. It's kind of a great point because I think we lose sight of that sometimes and like, well, we'll just give people this because it's sort of like, eating your spinach. It's good for you, right? But when you're doing it because it has a purpose and a direction, it often feels more meaningful. And this is true for students across the board. But I also love the coming in really ready to taste lots of different flavors because there was a tension I thought at New College between those who came and were like, I don't want to do what I had to do in high school anymore. Now I just want to do what I really love. And those who came in saying, oh, but there's also anthropology, there's also art history, and there's also music. Music connects up with psychology. Who knew, right? So I think that for me, that tension is actually where the richness lies, maybe. So what about you, Sam?
I actually have a lot of similarities to both how I experienced high school and once I got to New College. So I remember in high school that there was, that like set sort of like, these are the AP courses that you have to take. Like, these are the boxes you have to check. And I remember that there were some social science AP classes that were being offered to the IB students who the IB program started the year after I started high school. And so they were getting some opportunities that like my friends and I weren't getting. And I remember like at a certain point, like rallying my friends because we really wanted to take AP European history. And like basically we had to like find enough people who wanted to take the class to like justify it. And like pulled it off and like that felt really good and like that's what I really wanted my educational experience to be like, right? Like I wanted to be able to take the classes that I wanted to take and like learn things that like were interesting to me. And so when I learned about New College, I was like, wait, like that's possible, because my perception of college was very much like I'm going to go and I'm going to check off the boxes and then I'll get to take my major classes. And so when I got to New College, I think it was a little bit overwhelming, honestly, to be like, there are so many options. And I think my first semester was really eye-opening. I took like, I think I took courses in like definitely multiple fields. But it's funny Jeff mentioned Latin because I took Latin my first semester and absolutely flopped. Like I did so poorly in that class. But I also I learned something from that. And like, I think it really was kind of in the spirit of New College to like, I went to New College. My first semester got to try something that I had never experienced before. Like I had taken Spanish in high school and like done really well at it. And like didn't have a lot of experience, honestly, failing at something. And so I think even just that, like in and of itself was really educational, but also just being able to say, okay, like I'm going to dip my toe in a lot of different places. And like by the end of that semester, realized that like the area of concentration, the major that I had thought I wanted to do was not what I wanted to do. And so I think in a lot of ways, like just having that freedom really opened up a lot of opportunities and like new ways of thinking that I hadn't previously like considered, but was very excited about. And so, yeah, I think that's sort of my experience.
Yeah, and I just want to draw underline two of the things you just said. One of them that really resonates with me is the capacity to take something and not do well at it, to fall short, even to earn an unsatisfactory, but to still take it away as a learning experience. That's pretty unique, as opposed to simply saying, "Well, that was a disaster, and now I've lost those credits, and I will never touch that again." And I didn't learn anything, right? And then the second thing is right at the end there. Um, no, it'll come back to me. Not critical. Um, so I'm going to turn to breadth for a minute. So breadth, I mean to depth, right? So depth is often thought about in terms of choosing a major, right? An area that you're really going to study, a cluster of coursework in a single, often a discipline, or at least a disciplined area, even if you do interdisciplinary work. You might do a double major, but that's often imagined as two really quite separate, distinct disciplines. So I'm just curious if you could both talk a little bit about how you experience depth, and particularly if depth is really about expertise, what does expertise mean to you now that you look back at it as a real practicing field expert? Because you've both, gone on from what you did in college to develop areas of expertise. Do you want to jump in, Jeff? And
Yeah, I
get us
guess we'll
started?
just rotate. Why not? Yeah, I think when people first learn about new college, breadth is what shocks them, right? Like this idea that you're going to just let these young people decide what they're going to do and learn, this is going to be a total failure. But I don't think, behind that is the depth, right? And for me, the height of that is the thesis that I mean, I still joke with people. I wrote my thesis on a modestly known Estonian composer, Arvo Pärt, and his self-representation, combining, the sociology of art with my knowledge of music composition and analysis of his works. And I mean, that's depth, right? Like zooming in on one. I think very well-known Estonian composer, but other people often are not as well think that he's as well-known as I do. And I mean, I think what I came in, like so many new college students, just utterly curious, ready to learn. But the hardest thing I had to learn was discipline to get that to be a self starter, to really get the work done. I built up, ramped up pretty, non-linearly through your time there, right? First you had to get, some ISPs done, and those are some major products. Learn to buckle down. And I still I think it's very funny because one of the techniques I acquired to do this is often when a paper was due, I learned that I would write it was due the day before it was in my thing. And then what ended up happening is I would procrastinate and stay up all night and write it. And then I'd go to bed and I'd have a whole day to work on it again. So, even baby steps it took to learn the discipline. But,
That's really funny because that's something I still do. I give
is
myself
it?
fake deadlines. Absolutely. It's
I
the
mean,
only way.
you have to work with your
And
own
then
mind, know
you can be
yourself.
late, but you're not really late, right?
But you're not really actually late. Yes. But that's the kind of thing you have to know yourself to do. And that is what you have to do to learn, to have the discipline to get things done. And so, that's for me what depth came from, and allowing people, young adults, the capacity to have that responsibility. I mean, I think that's almost as important as allowing them to have the responsibility to choose what they want to do, because it's a lot of pressure put on your shoulders. But once you've acquired that, you're just very entrepreneurial and self actuated.
Yeah, that's great. I think that sort of entrepreneurial, I know how to do this. I know that I can take on a project and I will figure out how to do it. I know I can learn new things. I'm not afraid of that. That's kind of huge.
Yeah, I think for me, in many ways, I'm still sort of figuring out what depth means, right? I think
Hmm.
I'm constantly, honestly, I think one of the things that I took away from my time at New College is that, like, for all that, I am an expert in the work that I'm doing now, right? Like, I've been doing harm reduction, I've been working in public health, but I also think that along with that depth is a certain amount of humility that I'm always going to be encountering people who know things I don't know. I'm always going to be learning. And I think that that's something that I really took away from my time in New College, right? Like, um, I, uh, I wrote my thesis on, like horror films. And so, it's really funny. I watched one of the movies that I talked about, in my thesis the other night. And I had a moment where I was like, wow, like there are so many different things I would talk about now. But I spent, a full year working on that. Like, and so I think it's just really interesting and really humbling to be like, oh no, like as much as I want to be an expert, like, and I think of myself in that way in many ways, like it's an ongoing process. And I think that, yeah, I think that for me is like one of the biggest parts of depth, as much as like also that discipline piece of like buckling down, completing projects, like that's really important, but also just like that openness is really, really important to me.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that sense that one of the signs of expertise, right, is not having to act as though you know everything and being able to accept that, that other people you work with, even if they are not experts in the field, may bring knowledge to the table that you can learn from, right? Um,
I don't
you
think
know,
that I would have said that my first year in college. I think I would have said that I knew a lot of things that I didn't know.
that sounds familiar. Yeah. So we do
Can I
have a
actually?
question.
Oh,
Please
sorry. I was
jump
just
in.
gonna one small
Jump
thing
in.
on that I learned even later in my career. So one of the I work in the world of public policy, which means that you sometimes have to speak to the media. And so at one place that I worked, they put me through media training, which is terrible. It's terrifying. It's a horrible experience because they basically hire somebody who's really good at interviewing to make you say the dumbest thing that they can help you do. And even like towards the middle of my career, that uh, the person I was working with said, you do a really good job. Like your number one thing though is you just have to explain as much as you can. You feel this need to say that you know stuff. So like, I think it's endemic to the people who go to new college that they have that instinct. But it is totally true that the people who are the most knowledgeable, the ones that seem to care the least about whether you know that or not. So sorry.
No, I think that's a great observation. And we have at least one question that's popped up, which is thinking about what kind of end result are we expecting if we're trying to teach everyone in the same way? So this idea that everybody needs to take exactly the same, jump through the same hoops, get the same background, and somehow that's going to. And I guess I'm thinking about the world we're living in, right, and the way that it changes, right? The world that I graduated from and that you all graduated from has already changed. Things are changing rapidly out there. One of the things I'm keeping my eye on is generative artificial intelligence. That's causing a lot of agita in higher ed and writing classrooms and everything else. But it's also something we know students, recent graduates, are being asked how do they engage with it. So I guess one of the questions is this tension between depth and breadth, and giving people room to explore, to take very different things to get that breadth. The breadth doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. Is that a way of trying to produce, I don't know, more flexible thinkers, people who can adjust to a changing world? Or are we trying to produce, everybody's coming out sort of the factory with the same imprimatur um, imprinted? Might get back to your entrepreneurial point, Jeff, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, um, I do think it's having. So I went from New College to a grad program, and that was very eye opening too to see, because now so many grad programs run on the grad students doing a heavy amount of the teaching. So I got to see a very clear picture of what the education system looked like, especially what it looked like from the other side of this more, you said, kind of like almost like industrialized. And I was actually in the writing program, so I was in that first wave of that we must teach everyone the great literature, and the same set of skills. I mean, I think it comes from a couple of things. I mean, one, it comes from this fear that like that you must give this base level of quality knowledge, and that that this is a certification, right? Like, so you're certifying that these people know a base level of things, really not realizing that, again, I think you'd do better to make the students capable, empowered and entrepreneurial so that again, they can learn the thing when they need it. You don't actually need to make sure they have it right now. But I also think it comes from a fear that people at that age are not able to make the decisions that they need to make. And I think it's an unjustified fear, but I think that some administrators are terrified of people of younger adults making the decisions for themselves. I think they think that, that they'll mess it up or something. Whereas I think to your point earlier, if they feel engaged and, they know what they're building their vision for what they want to do, that and they don't feel that they are just doing this tick box exercise, that they are more engaged. And so I do think there's certainly much more room for flexibility in the current system, that much closer to a new college than the typical educational experience.
Okay. I think, yeah, I think it's hard to not view sort of like what is happening in terms of like trying to kind of control what students are engaging with, whether that's, limiting what classes are available, limiting what faculty feel comfortable like allowing students to engage with, that sort of stuff. Like it's really hard to not see that from like it's trying to control like what people learn, right? And trying to sort of like create this homogenized, like really bland and inherently, like white and cis and like all of those things, right? And like I think that that's really discouraging, but I do think also I think that students are also like at least somewhat aware of that, or at least I hope that's the case. Like I interact with like soon to graduate students in my work, and so like they're all folks that seem really bright and interested in learning and like asking questions that I think are like very like in the spirit of like being curious and like wanting to learn about people who aren't like them and that sort of thing. And I know that that's a very like small portion of people, right? Like I only see a handful of those students, but it makes me feel hopeful that like even as this is like institutionally like becoming more prevalent, that students are like not content with that. And so I think that that's a really interesting tension. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. It's very frustrating to see happening. But it is really encouraging to see that students still have that curiosity, even if they are sort of moving through those systems that are still trying to squash intellectual curiosity, I would say.
Yeah, what I'm sort of hearing is a combination of, there's a lot of anxiety in higher ed about we have to prove our worth. We have to make sure people are getting something out of it, that we can articulate, why you should actually come get a study and get a degree and so forth. In a moment where there's a lot of negativity about the value of doing just that, that it's a privilege, et cetera, et cetera. You should be studying a trade. You're going to make more money, all that. But what I sort of hear you both pointing to is there's a question about habits of mind and about mindset, right? Something about a growth mindset, the kind of curiosity you're talking about, Sam. So I guess I'm thinking about, what kinds of academic structures enable and foster those mindsets that allow the possibility of exploration of curiosity versus what we think of like teaching to the test, right? Which is, well, you're going to have to jump through those hoops. You want to make sure you're going to jump through that hoop nice and cleanly, and we don't have time for anything else. So, so I guess this kind of gets back to that question of how do we what was it that fostered, because you both clearly have those kinds of habits of mind. You're not afraid to learn new things. You're not afraid to be both an expert and a learner at the same time. Where does that come from? Was it just innate and you were special all along and we didn't need to do anything? Or were there specific things that you ran into that you think made that more possible? Like being able to take Latin and not do so well and feel like it wasn't a failure of you as a human being, right?
I think one of the things that's underlooked about the value of New College is not necessarily even what is happening as a result of the structure of your formal education, but what's happening when you're enmeshed in a group of peers who all have this freedom. And it's chaotic, and I sometimes think after coming out of new college, I think like, I'm really going to be surprised if anyone can shock me after going to new college, because there were a lot of shocking, great, which is perfect, things. And I think part of feeling that you've stayed afloat in a very chaotic environment with a lot of ideas, a lot of people coming at you. They're all exploring their thoughts and what they're doing, and combining things, and showing you new experiences. That's part of what makes you. I mean, certainly that goes to your disposition towards feeling like, okay, I mean, like if I did that, I could handle all that. Then this almost seems tame. Um, uh, and I, I certainly the curiosity was there, but I absolutely needed new college. I don't know that I could have done better anywhere else. I'm so lucky that I was in the state, because I was really going to have to look at some state school, and it did go to the again, putting some structure around it. And I'd say honestly, I've told Steve Miles this before. When you get really enmeshed in something and you're really excited about it, and you have an expert, and you're in this one-on-one, like almost not one-on-one, but like very small group relationship with that expert, it creates this thing I think is really unusual in the education experience, which is that you don't want to let them down. Like you feel like, I really want to learn this. I've got to find out how to get my stuff done, because, or, and I can't, if I borrow a book from the library and be late to return it, but you borrow a book from from your advisor, you better get it back before the end of the semester. And it is it's that kind of engaged environment that creates those abilities to start building the structures and the dispositions to be not just curious, because curiosity is great and it's the foundation, but you have to hook that curiosity to some structure as well.
So I'm hearing curiosity plus discipline, right? Which is another way of thinking about breadth and depth in a different language, right? Yeah.
I think also like flexibility is really
Mm,
meaningful. I think for me, one of the things that was a huge draw was the lack of like formalized grades. Like
yeah.
having the contract system, like knowing that I was going to get like actual feedback at the end,
Hmm.
and that it wasn't, like you said, like the teaching to a test thing, like I could do it. Um, but I've also always had trouble with like, you know, like test taking in general. Like that's just not how my brain works. And so having like a classroom setting where I like had the ability to like adjust like what my end product was, to like prove that like I did have that like that, like that I did know the material at the end. But that I didn't have to do it in like one specific way. I think that that was really huge. And I think another point that Jeff made that I think is really important too is just like the access that I had to faculty, like to have conversations, to be like, hey, I maybe am having a hard time with this. Or like, can I sit down with you and have a conversation about this specific thing? Like, where can I get like more information about this or whatever? Like, I think that was true of like the folks in the library too. Like just having those relationships was huge. And I think I also don't know that I would have gotten that if I had not ended up in new college. Um, and I was really grateful for having an environment that like fostered those relationships. And also I think that it also allowed me to feel, um, I don't know, like I feel like there was sort of a feeling that like I was more capable because I had that access, because I was treated well by my like by the faculty that I was working with, and I think that those relationships, like I still have some of those, and like I think that's really really incredible to have that, a decade out.
Yeah. So that makes me think of like almost an apprenticeship model, right? Where it's like, you have that kind of, because we could do the one-on-one tutorials or the small classes or in the video, there's a story about a conversation where a student came up to Jan Chambliss at the pool and said, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" and want to talk about like the existence of God, right? That's such a new college thing to do. Or such a liberal artsy thing to do, right? To like jump into the gigantic question with a brand new professor. But that does suggest a certain faith in the student, right? The faculty were there because they wanted to be working with young people and they thought that the capability to do amazing things, and it was worth having those conversations. You were going to jump in, Jeff. Sorry.
Just once, no, I was just going to back up on the grades thing. So it was curious, I had gotten grades obviously in high school, but then, college experience was no grades. And then suddenly I'm thrown in almost week 2, I'm giving grades to college students as a graduate student. And I was so surprised to see the effect of grades on the students. And what was really interesting to me is that it both sort of hurt the performance of the people who got the best grades and the people who got the worst grades. Because when the people who got the best grades got that first best grade, they tuned out almost immediately. And then, it was demoralizing for those who got the worst grade. They seemed eager and interested if maybe they were struggling a little bit. And maybe this was just some of those people who got that first great grade did not continue to go get them throughout. Someone who didn't get that first, quote unquote bad grade did not continue to have bad ones throughout, or, I certainly would not have. So I just, would reiterate that if we're talking about like the depth and breadth are hindered by this fear of that we have to make everything standardized, I do think grades are a part of that.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I know that there's a whole nother seminar precisely on what narrative evaluations did, but I just taught my first semester using actual letter grades because I didn't have them in grad school. I went to Santa Cruz, and then I didn't have them at New College, and I always loved the fact that I could use the narratives to encourage someone who was on a learning curve and to push someone who was already naturally good to aim for something higher, right? But it did scare people when they first came in from high school. Often they felt like they weren't quite sure where the bottom of the pool was, right? Um, so I'm just looking to see what other questions we've got floating around out there. So you'd mentioned chaos, Jeff, and I sort of had a thought about that too. This idea of students being able to explore widely and also striving for mastery at the same time does sound a little scary and potentially chaotic. And I think, honestly, even for me and what I do now, it's a bit of a struggle to try to, where are you down in the weeds? Where are you thinking way up high? Um, were there times where you found that freedom, where you regretted it, or you found it difficult to navigate? Were there pitfalls to trying to do sort of both of those things at the same time, rather than, your first 2 years you're on a track, and then you jump into the bigger thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd say two things. I mean, yeah, it is challenging. I mean, it was challenging personally. Sometimes that's hard, especially when almost everyone's coming in from this highly structured thing. So, especially so yeah, although, in the end, I love the chaotic nature of it. But then I would say I did have a moment that was interesting when I was at New College where something clicked for me. So, I really, I first, before I wanted to go into sociology, was music composition. I'm like, you know what? I really want to do that. And I'd always loved music, classical music, and, was really, it was actually an odd year where two or three of us that were like really dedicated to the music composition program were coming through at one time. Um, but I remember then saying, talking to Steve about like, okay, so how does this go? And he's like, oh, well, if you're doing music, you need to do this, that, and this. And I suddenly it clicked for me that like, oh, even though New College is quite open, and you could blend some stuff, like maybe one of those options you could double with something in sociology, make a nice synergy with something you were learning and something else. Actually, once you've gotten to a area of concentration, there are basic things you need to know. And not unlike every other school, you're going to have to follow those steps to learn them to be a decent, you're going to have to go to counterpoint 1 and counterpoint 2 and music theory 1 and 2. And then that's going to be a lot of what you're going to do. So hidden beneath the supposed, like, and that's not to denigrate the flexibility. It's to say that actually, interestingly enough, even though New College is very free, it may not be as chaotic as people think it is, because once you pick a path, maybe you're going to hybridize two paths, and that's really different, but it's still two paths that were given to you. Like, so there's more structure there than I think a lot of people realize.
I think that's totally correct. And one way to think about it, to frame it in slightly different language, is that there are sort of some core skills that you're expected to develop in order to be able to do things at a more advanced level. And whether that's defined by a discipline or is it communication skills? What is it? In certain ways, it always felt to me like New College was secretly kind of traditionally conservative at the same time as it looked wildly free and liberal, because at the end of the day, we always wanted to make sure that you had actually developed those skill sets. And somebody had posed a question about what employers are looking for, right? And employers are looking more and more for skills, not so much for majors. Like, what can you actually do, or what can you learn how to do, or what are you bringing to the table? And because so many New College students went on to various kinds of graduate school, we wanted to be sure people, when you got there, that was actually that was a good fit, right? And what I heard again and again was, oh, grad school was a breeze after what people asked me to do at New College. And I see nods, so that sounds like it resonates.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think one of the things that I got out of my time at New College was the ability to, like, and it feels very silly to say it out loud, but like the ability to think and the ability to write. And so I got to grad school and I was in a Master of Public Health program. A lot of people who were in the program that I was in had backgrounds in like more traditional university NatSci programs. And so when it was like the first time like that we needed to write a paper, like people were freaking out, like because they didn't have those tools. And I was sitting there with my gender studies degree, which is, unfortunately, like a lot of like punchlines are like the gender studies degree, right? But I was like, yeah, this is fine. Like I can write this paper. I'm not gonna like flail about it. And so it was very interesting to see like the people who on paper were very much like they had done all of the work to prepare for this program. And then like, I'm like, yeah, like I'm just gonna do it. It's gonna be fine. Like I'll check that box. But I think that that's a really interesting thing to experience firsthand. Seeing it is really fascinating.
Well, and I'm thinking too about whatever you're doing. I'm now doing wildly different kinds of writing because I'm learning to be an administrator, right? So that's a different kind of writing from what I did when I was doing scholarship or when I was teaching, right, where I'm writing back to students, trying to get them feedback. But I think one of the places I see breadth is really valuable is that you learn how to communicate to different audiences in different ways, in a way that's going to be received. And you can learn to write marketing copy if that's what you need to do. You can learn to write public service announcements if that's what you need to do, right? And you understand that it's not going to sound like a scholarly analysis, but the same skills are going to apply. So, do you all have questions for each other? I'd like to give you a little bit of space, or for us, or for me.
Well, I was just thinking about, sorry, just one thing to follow up on that, which I think you almost said it earlier, like what a amazingly silly idea now that we need to ensure that students have this basic knowledge for the workforce or whatever, when always has, even people who learn to code, even that was so, you were the golden, whatever. Now it's like, well, coding is like, I mean, I actually can code, but it's very easy to see now how things like that are not that helpful. So it's like silly to think that you're going to know exactly what people need. Really, more and more and more what people need is the ability to have that flexibility. And I had the exact same thing too with the people coming in and oh my God, if they'd been in the workforce for 4 years and they were like, a paper, oh my, it was hilarious to see them react, because it seems so, impossible. And even for when I first got into my first classes, I'd already read the books that we were reading at the intro level. So it was like, I mean, I've already written a paper on this, so much less have I written a bunch of papers, because you do ramp up so fast at New College. Once you've done the thesis, it's really you're certainly capable of taking the first level grad school papers. Yeah.
So I had one off the wall question. This is totally me, but so I was just I found it really interesting that, and I don't know if this is quite fair to you, Jeff, but that we all have some sort of interest or expertise in areas we might think of as health. I think we could maybe extend that to public policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not an area I thought I would become interested in. But things happen. You have health challenges yourself. You have people in your family, and you start to realize that we live in a world where one way or another we're all engaged in health. So that's making a healthier community, making a healthier community in the sense of citizenship, thinking about how we help other people to discover what health might mean for them. And I was just wondering about thinking in terms of health in that kind of broad One Health framework. We think about environment, we think about the human, the non-human, we think about community health. I was wondering if working within and across disciplines or fields of expertise, as you both did, both as students and then in your work lives, has made this connection in some way. It's a kind of a wild question, but thinking question, right?
I feel like Sam should go first, maybe given the health perspective, but
yeah, I think working across disciplines really did sort of direct me to where I ended up. So something that I was sort of like vaguely interested in throughout like my time at New College, like I took a lot of courses in like, of course, like gender studies more broadly, but like a lot of courses in sociology. And I was really interested in sort of just like general like social dynamics, and something that came up a lot for me was like questions of like queerness, questions of like health as it related to queerness, and like the AIDS crisis. Like those were sort of like entry points for me for thinking about health. And what I realized, and this is actually something that you said in class that I took with you, Miriam, that I think I've maybe taken out of context a little bit. But I remember you talking about doing work that was important to you, but in a way that was adjacent to you, so that it was a little bit less personal and a little easier to like navigate. And so I originally was really interested in doing work related to queerness. And I realized that like that was really draining to do. And so I started looking for things that were sort of adjacent to that. And so got really interested in like drug user health because I knew folks who used drugs growing up. Like that was really important to me. And so it sort of was something that was adjacent to this topic that had come up through thinking about like art history, thinking about music, thinking about like writing queerness in film. And I then was like, wait, there's this way that I can do this work that's really sort of like hold my interest in all of these different ways. And like I can go to grad school and I can get a degree and like do all of those things and still sort of like have that area of interest that like has really pulled like, I don't know, like at least a degree of expertise, right? Like that depth. And so I think for me, that's where the interest in health sort of like came from, and then sort of like how I ended up where I've gotten. Because I think a lot of times, like, because my work is housed within like an HIV prevention organization and has that background, but again, has that sort of adjacency to make it a little easier to balance. And so that's sort of how like the pathway, but also like in the way that all of those things have sort of coalesced for me. What about you, Jeff?
Health has been a big part of my career, and I'm not entirely certain. I mean, certainly it's exactly what Miriam is saying, that it's this nexus point between the built environment between like all of the systems that basically you study in sociology, it shows up in health and people's health. My sister was born with she's blind. She was born with multiple birth defects. Super smart, but I think maybe that helped to impress when I was younger. How health and even how the world is designed for certain people of certain dominant traits or whatever. The sighted versus the blind. I don't know. Maybe that's where because it has always been a passion area for me. So even in my old job, I worked with the Robert Johnson Foundation. Um, and I think if there's something maybe to go to the topic of being willing to think laterally and breadth, I think what's interesting when I go to alum gatherings is that I often look like I'm on I would say one side of a of a protest line where many people would be on the other side of that. Because I have worked for a lot of and with a lot of large businesses. And, I mean, I think one of the bigger stretches in my career was I went to grad school really with the hope that I would do something practical and valuable for the world. And, I have come to think that you have to work with the people who have a lot of the power and capacity to change. They have a lot of the resources to influence policy and to try and be someone who directs large businesses with a lot of resources towards doing things that are more helpful. So even though it looks like maybe an odd fit, I would endorse for a number of people that again, if you want to embrace some of that lateral thinking, some of that breadth, if you want to be in the places where conversations are happening, which is critical if you're going to really change the policies, you may need to be working with certain people that you wouldn't naturally be inclined to think about. So yeah.
That seems really interesting. So what I'm hearing here is a combination of really good career advice and also advice about how to be a citizen, right? Which is kind of where if we watch the video, we talk about, I want to say Cicero and the idea that liberal arts begins as this idea of the foundational, of how you educate future citizens, right? Of course, we have an expanded notion now of who can be a citizen from what Cicero might have had in mind. Cicero, and I may have my philosopher wrong, but what I'm hearing you both talk about is I think that thinking about the thing that's next to the thing, the adjacentness, that kind of lateral move, which is often the way careers move, right? I didn't intend to become an academic administrator. I thought I was going to teach high school because I like teach. I was more interested in more grown-up kids. And then partway through college, I was like, oh, I could teach college. That's a thing. People do that. Um, and then I taught at New College, which shaped me in tremendous ways for a long time. And because it's such a small place, you end up taking on multiple roles. And this is something you'll find in a lot of careers as well, is that things just open up in front of you and you say, oh, I guess I could do that, or somebody needs to do that, so I'll step up, right? Um, and that capacity to have conversations with very different kinds of people for whom you might have expected to be in the room with, and sort of help move them. That's a real need, right? We need people who can do that. So great. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say too, like, I think something that I do in a lot of my work that is actually like weirdly similar to what Jeff was talking about is like, I do a lot of like direct service, right? So I'm working directly with members of the community, but I'm also in a position where I can then translate what it is that that community needs into language that is that acceptable language. And it's that thing you were talking about of being able to adjust your writing to a different audience, being able to communicate across different audiences to make sure that like the folks who do have that power are being spoken to for better or for worse in ways that they will listen to or receive better. And I think that that's a really, really essential skill that's been really interesting to navigate.
I feel like we're kind of, because we had a little more time than most people, I feel like we're sort of approaching the end here. Any final comments or final questions? I mean, we started out with a frame of how universities, colleges think about depth and breadth in terms of requirements, in terms of majors, in terms of direction. But it feels to me like these are questions that have continued to proliferate into all the things that all three of us have done long since we left our undergraduate educations. Do you have new directions you want to be going in?
Always. That's the good news about working for a large business that does a lot of different things. I'm constantly being tasked with new topics and new policy areas, which is great because then that's I'm still the curious person who wants to have a lot of breadth. And I don't know. I'd be interested to hear this from Sam. Maybe as a final comment, but one of the things that's really helped me in my career that was set up at the base of New College is that, even when I deal with a lot of very ambitious individuals in my, colleagues, there are certain projects that just are so ambiguous. So no one wants them. High stakes, and because of being thrown in enough deep ends and learning how to swim, that's where I've made the most of my career is just finding a new deep end to jump in that everybody is running away from because they're thinking, this is just I have nobody. We can't even define what the problem is. Like, how are we supposed to do it? So I don't know, Sam. I mean, that's been for me what the whole allowing myself that the empowerment to feel that again I find I can learn something if right now I'm not doing what everyone else is doing, that's okay. I can figure that part out later. This sense of entrepreneurialism that like what, I love going to space where nothing's defined. Great. They won't have anybody to bother me. I'll be able to go do it myself. So I don't know, Sam, did you feel the same?
I do. And it's so funny. Like I work at a relatively small nonprofit. And I feel like I experience a lot of similar things where it's like I feel empowered to create projects that I like feel really passionately about, but also there are no like guardrails in place, right? There are no guidelines. It's just sort of figuring it out as you go and then seeing what happens. And sometimes that's, getting an idea, writing for a grant, and then just sort of like making a project happen. Sometimes that's, like a little more like I'm just gonna meet a need that's like really necessary and maybe not the most innovative, but like again, it's a project and I've gotta get it together and figure it out. And so yeah, no, I think I feel really similarly like that one of the things that I can point to a New College uh, that really set me up for success is that just like feeling like I can figure it out as I go, and that I'll learn the skills that I need when I need them, like Jeff said. I think that is definitely a big part of the work that I do, that I don't know that I would have seen, like foreseen, as a New College student. But it's the day to day, and I think definitely a really important skill.
So picking up that thread of the ways that that having that kind of flexibility and those kinds of challenges basically empowered you, right? To feel like I can take on new things and I can do scary things and I can do hard things. The other thing I'm hearing in the back of my head is you may remember Mike Michelson, who was president of New College for a long time, used to say that the liberal arts basically is good for training you to live with ambiguity, right? And I do think there was something to that. And I feel like figuring out how to live in ambiguity and how to jump into ambiguous situations and know that you're going to find a way through is an absolutely huge, a huge and powerful skill. So I'll just put that out there. I'm going to sort of I think we're ready to wrap this up. So I'm just going to close by saying thank you both very, very much. And thank you, audience. Those were some great questions that actually preempted some questions that I wanted to ask anyway. So thank you for that. Please join us for episode 5 of the 5 Disruptive Principles, which is coming up shortly. The topic there is assessment for excellence. So we'll get back to the question of narratives versus grades. And the date is next Tuesday, May 20th at 4:00 p.m. East Coast time. The moderator will be Grace Keenan, who's a recent graduate from New College of Florida with a Bachelor of Arts in Classics and a focus in ancient law. At New College, she served 2 terms as student body president and a member of the Board of Trustees. Grace also served as the external vice chair for the Florida Students Association for 2 years, where she organized legislative trips to Tallahassee and Washington, D.C. for hundreds of Florida public university students. And she will be starting her master's in educational policy at Harvard this coming fall. Panelists will also include William C. Dudley, Senior Research Scholar at Princeton University and a member of the UBS Board of Directors. From 2009 to 2018, Mr. Dudley was president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and I remember him as a commencement speaker at New College some years back. He earned a BA degree from New College of Florida and a PhD in economics from the University of California, Berkeley. And also joining the panel will be Isaac Telechia, a writer and journalist, currently editor-in-chief of Old School Catalyst, a startup nonprofit focused on student journalism. Telechia graduated from New College of Florida in the winter of 2024 with a BA in English and creative writing. And you can register for this free online seminar and other episodes in the series at altliberalarts.org. So thanks, everybody, and thank you for such a great conversation, Jeff and Sam. This was really fun. Thank you, Mary, for putting it together.
Thanks all.
Thanks.